Coming up next, ladies and gentlemen, is someone who has made her mark in the broadcasting space. Wearing multiple hats as a journalist and as an entrepreneur, she's now breaking new ground in digital media. Ladies and gentlemen, she is here to take us through her very, very fascinating journey on how she made it big in the media business. Please put your hands together and welcome on stage co-founder Quintillion Media, Ritu Kapur.
Hi, good evening, and thank you so much, Outlook Business, for having me here. Today is a very, very difficult day in so many ways. And I hope all of us here are hoping and praying that our brave Air Force pilot will be brought back home safe. It's a very, very difficult day for me to be away from the newsroom, as you can imagine, because there is developments happening every minute. And having said that, I'm so happy and delighted to be here. This is the closest I have been ever made to feel like a celebrity. So thank you so much for that. Okay, so my journey as an entrepreneur, now I need to qualify right in the beginning that at best, I'm an entrepreneur in the making. And really, I am an accidental entrepreneur. I really didn't set out to be an entrepreneur at all. They say greatness, those things about greatness, and some have greatness thrust upon them. Well, in a sense, life has sort of thrust entrepreneurship on me. So if I was to flash back, where do I start my journey of being an entrepreneur? I think it'll have to be as a little girl. I mean, that's really where the mind starts developing and the mind starts making up its mind about who you are and why you are doing what you're doing. So, think of the regular middle-class girl next door. That's who I was. As middle-class, as risk-averse, as simple, as straightforward, with some notions of being creative, etc., etc., etc. But entrepreneurship, business, MBA, far away from anything like that. So then I thought, when I was thinking about what I'm going to be saying this evening, I said, let me just say, where did it start? Let me just try and, do a flashback further back. So I was just thinking, when did I start thinking about, what women can do? And I think as a little girl, I actually thought that the Prime Minister was a female gender. That was called Pradhan Mantri. It had the E because it had to be a woman. Because for the longest time, as a little girl, I knew. I mean, Indira Gandhi was the Prime Minister, right? So Indira Gandhi was a woman. So women are Prime Ministers, and that was what I actually genuinely believed. And I think that's when the first role modeling happened, because the view was, as a little girl, if somebody asked me what I wanted to be when I wanted to grow up, my first answer, incidentally, used to be that I wanted to be Helen, because I thought that cabaret dancing was the coolest thing you could do. But the other thing that if I was asked in school, what would you want to be when you grow up? The answer came pretty easily to me, the Prime Minister, because women are Prime Ministers, and therefore I will be a Prime Minister. As simple as that. So I think that the middle-class regular girl, I think the first edge came with the fact that a woman could be a Prime Minister. I think that gave you the feeling that you could be bigger. I think the other thing that gave me the edge was the kind of liberal values family that I came from. I could see, I was a convent-educated girl, and I could see how, for a lot of my colleagues and peers and friends in school, their lives were mapped out for them. They were constantly being told to be the achhi ladki. I think a lot of us grow up constantly being told that you've got to be an achhi ladki. The achhi ladki, and the achhi ladki is defined, and very often the definition of achhi ladki is one who will be sasural ready. One who will be a superb asset in the sasural. And that's pretty much how you are defined as the achhi ladki. But I think in my case, because I grew up with 3 brothers and I was pretty much brought up as the 4th boy in the system, I had none of that achhi ladki business. I had none of, I was pretty much allowed to be. And I can say with a lot of confidence that in my time, in the early 70s and 80s, I don't think a lot of girls were allowed to be. I was allowed to be. I mean, for instance, things like calling from a thana because I had been arrested for doing a dharna outside college and saying, hello parents, I've been arrested. To making it to the local paper headlines because I was protesting against tree cutting at Jamia University. I mean, these were things that were laughed about and enjoyed and celebrated around the family dinner table. I was never told ki beta aage se aise nahi karna. In fact, the view was good, have fun, do be who you are. And I think that definitely gave me the edge because it pushes you to think for yourself. I mean, I vanished to drought-ridden Barmer, living in the villages for almost 3 months of my life with almost no contact with my family, and I was allowed to be. I really think, I really think that if you were to look at what allows a woman to be a woman of worth, I think it's really this early stages of upbringing. I think if all of us can be, we can just allow the little girls to be, you're going to have many, 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 many more women of worth. And now if I was to skip to, I must confess that a couple of times, the only reference to a sasural that would ever come in my life was to be made to eat turoi and loki. Ki dekho, turoi and loki nahi khaogi, to sasural mein kya hoga? But it wasn't obviously a joke. There was no other, you must behave in a certain way. So, I think one of the narratives that I would want to keep bringing up again and again is that this never put upon yourself the pressure to be the achhi ladki, never put upon yourself the pressure to be like somebody else, and never put the pressure to be on yourself to not do anything, that this is not for you. And I say that because even though I was a co-founder of Network 18 when it was born, I defined for myself the role that I thought I could do. I was never a cutthroat MBA. I was never a strategist. So clearly, I confined myself and enjoyed myself immensely as I did that to the creative and content role. And I thought that was fabulous. I did that for almost 23 years of my life. And within the content role, took on leadership roles within the content. But I never thought of myself as somebody who could do the business. For that, I always thought it had to be somebody with an MBA. It always had to be, there was a preconceived notion of, I was unable to, at that point, make the distinction between an entrepreneur and an MBA. An MBA, an entrepreneur is somebody who works from the gut, who is not risk averse, who is willing to go out and do something and create something without looking over the shoulder. An entrepreneur is somebody who cannot bear to be an employee, who wants to be her own boss, right? And I was just conflating MBA and sort of those kind of the certification of what allows you to look at business. So, the Network 18 story, I'm sure all of you know about. We grew. We became one of India's largest media networks, from Colors to CNN IBN to CNBC to First Post. I mean, we were having a lot of fun. But being first-generation entrepreneurs, where you are dealing, on the one hand, with regulations from a government that doesn't necessarily understand entrepreneurship entirely. especially in the media business. And on the other hand was, Raghav started out with a princely sum of 20,000 rupees. So at some point or the other, the regulation and, mounting debt came and hit us, and then we exited Network 18. But one of the things that happened just before we exited Network 18 was I prided myself while at Network 18 in being anonymous in the company. I never wanted to be seen as a promoter. I just wanted to be seen as just another creative person in the team. I was held up by several people as sort of the role model of humility and, self-effacingness. And I started believing that those were the virtues that I needed to uphold. Just a few months before the exit happened, one of my team members, a very, very young team member, came up to me, and he just completely came up to me and blew his fuse. And he said, all this thing about your being humble and self-effacing and all is very good for you, and you can pretty much stuff it up for yourself. But the point is, we as your team are beginning to suffer because of your self-effacingness. We don't get to demand what we want because you are stepping back. And that made me think a lot of things. That unfortunately, very soon after that, we exited. So I wasn't able to really exercise what I was beginning to think about, act on what I was beginning to think about while at Network 18. And then we were out there again, Raghav and me, and for a long time it was just me because Raghav was still doing the transition for the company. And we said, what do we do now? And that's when I think I became the accidental entrepreneur in those months that I was on my own and trying to figure out what next. For the first time in our lives, we had capital. So that was one big, large problem taken care of. So I was the accidental lucky entrepreneur now, one which came, sort of lined with capital to begin with. What do you do? Being sort of insane workaholics, sitting back home or going for holidays or whatever was not an option at all. So I thought about, if I have to be an entrepreneur, what is one of the things that I need to have? I need to have a challenge. I have to have something that gives me a knot in the stomach. And to do that, I really needed something that was completely outside my comfort zone and yet played to my strengths, which is when we thought about going digital. We had never really done anything strongly in digital. We were largely broadcasters. TV was what we had. I knew TV and production and video production and ideation like the back of my hand. It was my comfort zone. I had done it for 23 long years. I could have pretty much done that, but that's no challenge then. Staying within your comfort zone was no challenge. So that's when we decided that digital is it. And of course, at that point in time, now all of us are looking at our mobile phones and all of us are consuming content of our mobile phones. It wasn't quite, it's amazing how much has happened in the last 5 years, how much the consumption has shifted from the TV screen to the tiny mobile screens in your hand. And the only thing that I realized then is I regretted not having involved myself in the business aspect of Network 18 earlier, because that's where I was lacking. Because you see, running a media business is maybe, I don't know enough about some of the businesses that you are doing, but it's a slightly different business because you need to know your editorial. You can't be running the business without knowing and understanding the ebb and flow of content, which came easy to me because that had been my... The second thing is, in digital, you need to know tech. You cannot be running that business because that tech is evolving so fast. New technology, new apps, new tools. The platforms like Facebook, Google, etc., which are essentially your distribution platforms, are changing their technology. They're just sort of renewing themselves, like Mickey was talking about renewing your body. They just virtually, it's like a quarterly renewing of technology constantly. So you need to understand technology. I mean, you need to understand what coding does and what coding is before you can get into that. You need to understand how design marries technology. I mean, I didn't even know what UI and UX is. I don't know the difference between UI and UX and what one does to the other and how that happens. But you need to know that if you want to run, if you want to be an entrepreneur in the digital business, you need to know that. It's not just good enough to know business. You need to understand the new evolving business models. You need to understand how to evangelize a ad revenue business model where the brands are largely still looking at their spends on print and broadcast. And how do you evangelize that? How do you allow people to start realizing that if the audiences are now on digital, if the audiences are now consuming content of a small mobile screen, then why is the ad spend not coming here? And so so basically it was a big challenge. And for me, there was one more challenge. For years, I had created content for SECA 40 plus male. I was now going to be creating content for 12 to 24-year-olds. And the challenge was, this is an environment where 70% of the consumer on the internet is male. How do I get women to consume content? How do I make content relevant? How do I reach out? How do I use tech, content, and everything digital in my control, or not even in my control, to actually go out and get the woman consumer in? So lots to do. But the biggest thing that I learned, and that was my first lesson in entrepreneurship, was you've got to unlearn. I had to unlearn everything broadcast, and completely open myself to learning everything digital. I just couldn't rest on any laurel. And that's one of the things that this whole experience taught me, that nothing is forever, and you've got to constantly renew your skills, because that's the only way it happens. So given this entire thing, that knot in the stomach that I was looking for as the next game plan, here it was. Knot in the stomach was completely out there. Do's and don'ts of entrepreneurship. The next lesson really for me was, and I just want to qualify something here before I sort of go into the lessons of, I don't think there is any template at all for entrepreneurship. I think every entrepreneur sets out and makes and breaks her own rule. So what I'm sort of going through is not like a do's and don'ts for anyone to follow or emulate. It's just a story of what I think I learned when I was going through this. You're only as good as your team. So the next lesson was, or the next challenge was, as people who were relative nobodies now, I mean, we didn't even have a product, we didn't even have an office, we didn't have anything. How do you recruit and convince people to join? And who do you want in your team? And one of the things that was clear to me was, I don't want veterans. I don't want people who come to me and say, I know content like the back of my hand, because the first thing that I knew was that I was to unlearn. So rather than work with people who are going to be a whole bunch of people who are trying to unlearn, I decided I'm going to put together a team of people who I can learn from, which meant what? I needed kids, I needed the 20-year-olds who have never worked anywhere else. I wanted people who didn't come and say, but this is how it's done. Because I wanted to set a template, or I wanted to create a product which was like nothing that nobody had ever done before. And if you have to do that, then you don't have people who are insecure about this relative to what they'd done earlier. So we actually then put together a team of a lot of people, a lot of young, bright people who were straight out of college, not even journalism school, straight out of college, very digital native, because this next generation is born playing with iPads and mobile phones, and they know it like the back of their hand. So there was so much to learn from them. And it was an eclectic mix of, people from print, broadcast, design, tech, etc., etc., etc. And we now the thing is, once you have this eclectic, team that's come together, what do you do? Do you sit and say, do you herd them and say, this is how we're going to go about it? No, we decided that that's absolutely not what we're going to do. What we did was say, listen, why don't you guys tell us what we should be doing? And that's the one big lesson for me. We've been able to take Quint from scratch, from nothing to where it is today with about 40 million viewers every month and growing. And I imagine that this month is going to be even bigger and better, is by empowering your team members. You have to empower them, and most importantly, allow them to fail. Empower them to fail. Because unless you allow them to experiment and fail, you will not allow them to succeed. This is the one mantra that I think I'm going to hold on for the rest of my life, which is allow people to experiment. Because the minute you template or the minute you set standards for this is how things must be, that's a bit of a kiss of death. Or the minute you're saying, hey, look at how those guys are doing it, let's try and do more of that, that's again the kiss of death. So that's the other, so we had the product, we had the vision, which is that we're going to do a digital product, which is going to make news relevant to young India, because the view was that young India is not interested in politics, young India is not interested in news. So we said, we're going to make content available to young India. We're going to make it video first. We're going to make it as video driven as possible, because there was no digital first video in the environment, so that gave us an advantage. And we said we're going to have this team which is going to create magic by just letting them be. Because my life's first lesson was, my parents let me be and do my own thing. And it stood me in good stead. So why don't I just apply the same mantra and see where that takes us? And I can tell you that it's been great. The other thing that actually the journey at Network 18 had taught us is to be constantly honest and transparent with your team. Never try and give the team a sense of everything is going right if it isn't. Never give your team the sense of, oh God, there's such a huge burden, even when you are sailing through. So I think transparency and honesty with your team, and basically you're constantly not an employer-employee relationship with your team, you're constantly in a partnership with your team, because that's where, and I say that selfishly, I'm not saying that out of the largeness of my heart, I'm saying that because I think I'm saying that out of pure selfishness, because I think that's where growth comes from. And the other thing is to constantly, this is my learning from the last 4 years, is to constantly keep renewing the team. Because every time I find a new team member joins, not only do we add a new skill, new approach, new attitude, but it also challenges, it never allows your team to slip into a comfort zone, because there's always somebody coming in and challenging status quo. So never allow status quo. Make the rules, make templates, break them, make the rules, make templates, break them. I think it's important to have clarity of vision, which has to be based on research. You've got to know your space, you've got to know your industry, you've got to know your fundas. But after, put all that research in a basket and then function, on a gut level. Gut is where entrepreneurship is. No gut, no entrepreneurship. It's really that. Go with instinct. That I think any entrepreneur that you talk to, most of the fabulous entrepreneurs who are here, I don't think anybody has picked up a template from somewhere and said, I'm going to do more of this. I think everyone's operating on gut. Be decisive. That's my other lesson. Just be decisive. Good decision, bad decision, galat decision, sahi decision, weak decision, strong decision, whatever it is, be decisive. Don't waffle. Don't say, yes, maybe, I'll think about it. Or say, yes, go ahead today, and then tomorrow say, hey, wait, I'm having a rethink. I think that completely destabilizes teams. Be decisive. Ek bari decision le liya, then stick by it. And then if that decision goes wrong, be accountable to your team for that. Have the ability to say sorry to your team. Because a lot of your decisions, I know it's all very well to say go by your gut and go by your instinct. Instinct can be right, instinct can be wrong. But be accountable. Never shy away from conflict. I can tell you the last 4 years have been crazy. They've been difficult in so many ways, even though they've been so enjoyable. But never, never, never shy away from conflict. Whether it's a raid in your office, or whether it is, legal defamation matters. Being a journalist in today's India is tough, and I'm sure, Outlook is as much will understand where I'm coming from when I say that. I mean, we rank 138th on press freedom, on world press freedom. I mean, that tells you where we are. So, conflict, there is a plenty, especially if you're speaking truth to power. But deal with the conflict, face the conflict. The day you capitulate and the day you buckle under any pressure or sort of shy away from conflict is when you will lose the respect of your team, respect of your audience, and that's the worst thing that you can do to your brand. Because believe me, anyone in journalism who's capitulating today is looking at short-termism. Because the battle is eventually going to be won. The highest currency in journalism is eventually going to be one of credibility. So it's not about... since, in my network 18 years, I had been the humble, anonymous, behind-the-scenes person. Networking is not something that comes to me. You'll never see me comfortably networking anywhere. The networking sessions is when you'll see me actually sitting in some corner eating a samosa or vanishing, really. So, because I really feel, and I don't even think that networking really is going to get you far. I think rather than networking, build relationships, make friends. Because I think that's really where, again, the long-term benefits really lie, if one was to look at friends with benefits. Another lesson the last 4 years is never break your word. It's as important as being decisive, is never break your word. And if you encounter somebody who does, never trust that person again. Don't ever get suckered. Because nobody likes anyone wallowing in self-pity because they've been suckered. Remember, nobody likes anyone who's down and out. It takes a long time to build a reputation. It took us a long time to build Network 18, and I'm happy to say that we've already built a brand. We started with nothing. When we started out at Network, I used to call up people. For whatever reason, we decided to call ourselves a Quint, because the name came from, we were called Network 18, and once we exited, we were not, as part of the exit deal, we couldn't use 18 in the next name that we had. So we were wondering what to call ourselves, and I was reading something, and how on the iPad you can sort of say, look up and read the meaning. I came across quintillion, and I said, what is quintillion? I don't know, and I clicked on it. It was 10 to the power of 18. So I said, fabulous, let's just call ourselves, we're going to be 10 times more dynamic, 10 times more magical. So let's call ourselves Quintillion. Having said that, so Quintillion is the name of the company, and the product is called the Quint, very good. But the minute you started calling up, when you were just being born, and say, hello, I'm calling from the Quint, say, what? Squint, quant, squint. So that's when I realized one of my lessons then was the importance of building a brand, and what do you do? And that's actually what got me out of my, I'm nobody, I will never be in front of because I needed to, for the first time in my life, go out and be there and talk about my product and talk about my brand and be the brand ambassador. I mean, I can assure you that 6 years ago, if you'd called me to be part of this, I would have said, no, not for me, I'm not really an entrepreneur, But I want to be here, and I want to tell as many people here as I can that, we have the Quint, and the Quint is a great place. So brand building becomes such an important exercise when you're starting from scratch all over again. However tough the going be, just if you're a leader in a team, just never lose your cool. Anger is completely no. I mean, follow Mickey's meditation mantra, do what you can, but you have to be calm. You have to be calm and I work with millennials. I work with a newsroom, chock-a-block with millennials. Believe me, no one's taking an angry boss anymore. And I don't see why they should. So, stay away from anger. And before I wind up, just a couple of broader reflections that I have for working women. One thing that I have to tell people, because this is coming from my interaction with some very, very close friends of mine, is women should never stop working. You should just never, in whatever form, you should just never stop being financially independent. Come what may, you can give yourselves a million excuses. I'm going through pregnancy, I've got a baby, my children are my priority, my family is my priority, I'm building a home, I need to give my husband a hot cooked meal when he comes back home, etc., etc., etc. Listen, don't fool yourselves. Just don't fool yourselves. Don't ever stop working because you don't know what's around the corner. I can tell you that I have a lot of friends, very brilliant. Some of them MBAs. Remember, I always had this thing about I'm not an MBA. They're MBAs who decided to stay home when their babies were born. And they did that for a good 7, 8, 10 years. Life, you don't know what turn life takes. You can go through a divorce, God forbid. You can, your family can go through a financial crisis. Children can grow up and not need you anymore. Lots of things can happen. And then when you try and climb back into the workspace, it's fairly unforgiving. It should. In an ideal world, it shouldn't be like that. But it is. You find it difficult to be at par with peers in terms of the roles that you're offered or the kind of salary packages that you're offered. And you do get a little rusty. So it's, do not stop working. I have to tell you that one of the things that I have to actually thank my mother for is that she never taught me how to cook. I don't know of too many women who are like me. Till date today, I have never cooked dal chawal. I have never cooked. I don't know how to. That's because my mom was very clear that, I think she doubted my skills in the kitchen, but she just felt that I wasn't meant for the kitchen. And I'm so grateful for that because I knew that at no stage could I stay at home because if I stayed home, I'd be useless. There's not too much that I'm very good at that running a home would do. So this is, I feel very, very strongly about that. I also think that you should always have your independent bank account. Come what may. There's the 2 or 3 things that I think women should just never let go of because, the longer women say that they must stay at home for the kids, family, parents, etc., 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 the longer you are allowing men to run institutions, allowing men to lead, allowing men to be the guys who will bring home the bread and therefore be the more important people in life. I'm so delighted to be here. I'm just so used to, as a journalist, being in places which are just manels. I was at a journalism conference in October last year where on day 1 of the conference, I was the only woman. It was such a dark room because there were just men in black suits. It's just so lovely to have color over here. Give me color any day, man. It's just like... So, this is, you have to go out and be the people who are running institutions. Otherwise, who's going to decide on... There were 5 male judges on the talaq laws. Why? Because some able women chose to stay home and prioritize the kids. Kids will grow up. Believe me, I have very independent kids now. Very important. When it comes to being a woman, be selfish. Please take every support system you can have and take it for granted. Don't be apologetic. Don't be, oh God, I'm putting somebody else through trouble. I can tell you that in my case, I first lean on my mom, who brought up my kids completely, to the extent that when I first got a pup, I would on my way to work leave the pup also at my mom's place, expect my parents to trade him and pick him up like I did for my kids, pick them up on my way back from work. And I'm so happy that I took that for granted because, it just allowed me to do what my parents initially, guided me to do. It's just allowed me to make my rules, break my rules, be myself. My mom-in-law here, she runs my house. So I'm doubly privileged. And I know that not everybody is as lucky as I am. But believe me, I'm as lucky as I am because I selfishly maneuvered my way into being this lucky. So, I'm going to do a little bit of a chance make dance, and I'm going to use this opportunity to thank my mom and my mom-in-law, Manju Kapur and Subhashini Behel, and say thank you because, I'm so busy working all the time that I'd never have the time to say thank you to them and do my salam because they're really women of worth. If I know how to do cost control at work, I think I've learned it from them. If I know how to do the Annapurna Barakat thing at work, it's because I have subconsciously imbibed it from them because they were in their own way such fantastic entrepreneurial homemakers working with very modest budgets. So there's a lot of skills to pick up from this generation. If you ask me, that's really, if you ask me who my role models are, that's really what it is. Okay, we're running out of time, so I'm going to just close in. Just one thing about this lean-in business. I think the leaning in business presupposes that you're at the table. I think you've got to just butt in. I think as women, I think it's important to butt in. So I know it's not all easy, and I'm skipping the rest of what I was going to say, but बहुत hard है, लेकिन अपना time आ गया है, so go make the most of it. And just one last thing, sorry, I have to do that plug. Listen, if you guys, on this tension between India and Pakistan, if you guys are encountering any strange, suspect WhatsApp forwards or things coming into your mailboxes, please do not forward it. We run at the Quint, we run a fact-checking thing called webcoof@thequint.com. Please feel free to send us a mail or text us at webcoof@thequint.com, and we promise to fact verify and send you the fact before you share. Let's not precipitate matters by sharing anything that may not be correct. Thank you so much.
To making and breaking rules, ladies and gentlemen. Another warm round of applause for our WoW Queen. Thank you so much for sharing your story. That was absolutely amazing.